to Zen Mind Journey, a place of calm, of peace, of stillness. Here you are invited to slow down, to let go of the noise and hurry, and to find gentle stillness within. This hour, we share soft whispers of Zen wisdom, short stories that carry timeless truths, guiding you toward inner peace. Take a deep breath and settle into this moment, where each story is a quiet step along the path to calm. Relax your body, soften your mind, and allow yourself to simply be. Your journey to peace begins now.
It began on a morning draped in grey. The sky was low, heavy with clouds, and the rain fell not in sheets, but in a soft, endless hush, like the sound of someone breathing in their sleep. A young woman stood at the edge of a mountain trail, her cloak soaked, her boots thick with mud. She had set out days ago following a map drawn in ink and given to her by someone long gone. It had led her well, until now. Now the path was gone, wiped clean by the rain, no markings, no signs, just glistening stone and the rustle of wet leaves. She stood in the drizzle, confused, frustrated, and very tired. The mountains were quiet, no birds, no wind, only water, and something else, something softer, a silence that seemed to watch her. She looked down at her feet, mud and moss, no trail. She looked ahead, mist. Then she looked inward and took a breath, not a deep one, just enough. Then, without the map, without the markers, she stepped forward. One step, then another, each footfall soft, unsure, and yet true. The path she had known was gone, but something new was beginning to form beneath the rain. The rain followed her, not angrily, not fiercely, but patiently, like an old friend with nothing left to prove. She walked, past trees that leaned as if listening, past stones slick with memory. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time was different in the rain. Eventually, she came upon a small house barely visible through the mist. A wooden gate, painted red long ago, stood slightly open, and behind it an old man knelt in the mud, tending to a single yellow flower. He looked up as she approached, but said nothing. She stood at the gate, rain dripping from her sleeves, and asked, "Is this the path to the monastery?" The man shook his head, then nodded, then shrugged. "Yes," he said finally, "and no. It depends on what you call the path." She frowned. "I mean the one drawn on the map." He smiled. "Ah, that one. It washed away last spring. The mountain took it back." The woman looked down, felt the ache in her legs, the damp in her bones. "Then I've gone the wrong way." "Not necessarily," the man said, patting the earth beside the flower. "Sometimes the right path is the one that appears only when you stop looking for it." She said nothing, only watched the flower, its petals wet, its colour somehow brighter in the rain. The man stood slowly, his knees cracking. "You can rest here," he said, "or keep walking." Either way, you'll arrive somewhere. She looked back the way she had come, then forward, then stepped through the gate and sat. She stayed with the gardener for 2 days. They spoke little, shared warm rice, boiled tea over a small fire. The rain never stopped. Not once, but it softened, turned gentle, like a lullaby poured from clouds. On the 3rd morning she rose early. The garden glistened. Mist curled between branches, and in the damp earth, tiny green shoots reached up like shy questions. She stood at the gate, uncertain. The gardener came beside her. "You'll go today," he said, not as a question, but a noticing. She nodded. "But I still don't know the way." He bent down, brushed his hand across the mossy ground, and revealed a faint trail carved not by tools, but by time. "Paths appear when feet return," he said, "even when maps do not." She stared. It was there, just barely, a crease in the forest floor, worn smooth by travellers who never left marks. "It won't be straight," the man added, "and it won't look like a path from above." She smiled. "Nothing does. In the rain." With a small bow, she thanked him, then stepped onto the trail with quiet feet and an open heart. And as she walked, the rain did not hinder her. It held her, wrapped her in silence. And somehow, each time she lost the trail, a new one appeared. Not ahead, but beneath her, as if the mountain itself was guiding her one step at a time, not by certainty, but by presence. By dusk, the trail faded again. The forest grew thicker. The rain returned, heavier now, but still soft, still kind. She stopped beneath an overhang of rock and moss, waited, listened, let the rain speak. She no longer wondered where she was. There was no map, no destination, only the sound of drops meeting stone and the slow, steady rhythm of her breath. Then, through the trees, a light, faint, warm, steady. She followed it, not quickly, not urgently, as if drawn by something older than direction. And there, in a hollow of the mountain, was a wooden temple, unmarked, unmapped, but undeniably meant. Its lanterns flickered with welcome. No gate, no name, just a space waiting to be entered. Inside, a single monk sat cross-legged by a fire. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You found it." She lowered her hood. Steam rose from her shoulders. "I wasn't looking anymore." He nodded. "That's why you arrived." She stepped inside, removed her boots, knelt. The monk poured tea into a simple clay cup. "This place isn't on any map," he said, "because it isn't a place. It's a moment." She sipped. The warmth spread through her hands, her chest, her quiet. And outside, the rain fell like a blessing, no longer washing things away, but revealing what had always been waiting beneath the noise.
And now, for the next story.
In a quiet temple nestled between 2 ridges where the moss grew thick and undisturbed, there lay a small rock garden. Not grand, not ornate, just a rectangle of sand, a handful of stones, and the slow rhythm of time passing through shadows. Each morning, an old monk named Ray would step into the garden barefoot, a wooden rake in hand. He would not speak. He would not sweep. He would listen, and then, with a long exhale, he would begin. His rake moved in slow, deliberate arcs, etching lines through the sand like ripples in a still pond. Around the stones, he circled, never touching them, only framing them with space. It was said Ray had tended the garden for 60 years, but no one ever asked him why. Because those who visited, those who stayed long enough to notice, began to hear something in the patterns he drew. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling. As if the garden, though still, was speaking, a whisper without breath, a voice made of sand. One evening, a young novice named John stood at the edge of the garden and asked Ray, "What are you listening for?" Ray paused, the rake resting gently in the sand. He turned to John, eyes soft with age. "Not for," he said. "With." John frowned. He did not understand. But something in the monk's stillness made him quiet his questions. He simply stood and watched as Ray returned to his raking. The lines flowed, the stones held their silence, and somewhere between the two, Jun began to hear something. He couldn't name it, but it brushed the edge of his thoughts like wind through tall grass. The next morning, just after the bell had echoed through the temple, Ray approached Jun as he finished sweeping the corridor. He handed the young novice the rake. Worn, simple, smoothed by years of quiet hands. "Today," Ray said softly, "the garden listens to you." Jun hesitated. "But I don't know the patterns." Ray smiled. "Neither do I." With that, he bowed and stepped aside. Jun entered the garden. His feet touched the cool sand. The early light stretched long shadows across the stones. He stood still, then began to rake. Straight lines, as he had seen Ray do. Then curves. Then spirals around the largest stone. But something felt wrong. The rake scratched too loudly. The lines felt forced. His hands tensed with the urge to make it look right. Ray, from the edge of the porch, said only, "You are trying to draw. Try to listen instead." Jun stopped. He closed his eyes. The wind brushed past his ear. A crow called from the distant trees. His own heartbeat, steady now, like footsteps on soft ground. He opened his eyes and looked at the garden. Not as a surface to change, but as something already speaking. He moved the rake again, this time slower, gentler, letting the stones shape his path. A curve here, a space there, a pause. The sound of the rake softened. The garden responded. Not with noise, but with ease. The lines no longer mattered. They would vanish with the breeze. What stayed was something deeper. When Jun stepped out of the sand, Ray took the rake and nodded. "You heard it." Jun said nothing, but his breath was different. He would never rake as Ray did, nor was he meant to. But the whisper, the one that lived between movement and stillness, had begun to speak to him too. Days passed, then weeks. The rhythm of the temple continued, bells, incense, chores, study. But something in June had slowed, softened. He found himself pausing more often, listening to small sounds. Broom bristles against wood, a leaf dropping into water, his own breath as it entered and left without needing permission. One morning, rain came. Not a storm, not a drizzle. A steady, patient fall that turned the world to silver. The monks remained indoors. The garden would not be raked today. But John stepped out anyway. He walked barefoot, the wooden porch cool beneath him. He carried no rake, only stillness. As he approached the garden, he noticed something. The sand was soaked, the lines from the day before erased. The stones gleamed under the rain, dark, grounded, unmoved. He sat at the edge of the garden, did nothing, and said nothing. And then he heard it, a whisper, not from the rain, not from the stones, from within. A knowing he could not name, a presence without form. The garden, even undone by water, still spoke, not with symbols, not with marks in the sand, but with presence, with the patience to remain even when all patterns have been washed away. John sat there for a long time, rain touching his robe, soaking through, but he did not move, because nothing was missing, nothing needed to be added. The silence was not empty, it was full, and it welcomed him. When the rain finally slowed and the sky brightened, John rose. He bowed to the garden and walked back inside, his heart as still as the stones. The next morning, June rose before the bell. The rain had passed, leaving behind a freshness that clung to every leaf and stone. He walked quietly to the garden. The sand was damp, untouched, open. Ray was already there, standing, still. In his hands the rake, but he did not move. He simply looked at the garden as if it was speaking still. June bowed. Ray returned the gesture. Then, without a word, he placed the rake in June's hands and stepped aside. June stood there for a long time. He did not begin right away. He waited until he felt the quiet return. Then he raked. Not to form something, not to impress, only to move with what was already there. The sand yielded easily. The stones accepted their silence. And between them, a whisper. John could not say what it meant, only that it felt like remembering something he had never been told. When he finished, Ray stepped forward. He did not inspect the patterns, he did not nod. Instead, he handed John a small object, a stone, smooth, plain, ordinary. "What is this for?" John asked. Ray looked at the garden, then at Jun. "To carry the whisper wherever you go." John closed his fingers around the stone. It was warm from Ray's hand, and somehow it felt full, not with weight, but with presence. That afternoon, John left the temple. He did not say goodbye, nor did Ray. They only bowed as stillness bowed to stillness. In the years that followed, John became a teacher, but he spoke little and raked nothing. He carried the stone with him, not to show but to remember. And those who sat near him said they felt something odd. A quiet in the bones, a hush behind the noise, as if a garden, somewhere unseen, was drawing lines in soft sand, just for them.
And now, for the next story.
The bell beyond sound. In a forgotten valley nestled between folded hills and whispering ridges, where clouds often touched the earth and stayed for tea, there stood a humble temple. No grand gate, no golden spires, only a low roof cradled by moss, and wooden walls warmed by years of morning sun and gentle rain. This was the temple of silent pines, where the wind moved slow, as if it too had something to learn. At the heart of the temple courtyard, hanging beneath an arched beam of blackened cedar, was a bell. Not just any bell, this one was ancient, perhaps older than the trees around it. Its surface bore the faded etchings of lotus petals and nameless symbols, worn soft by 1,000 seasons of wind and hands. Each morning before the sun rose fully over the ridge, a young monk named Tenzin would step quietly across the dew-dark stones, his robes brushing the air like a whisper, and strike the bell once. Only once. The sound would rise, slowly at first, like breath gathering, and then bloom, golden and round, spreading into the still air like ripples through a bowl of water, left undisturbed overnight. And in that single note, the valley listened. Birds paused mid-song. Leaves stilled. Even the river, which ran not far from the temple's edge, seemed to hush its burble. The villagers in nearby hamlets often paused whatever they were doing, chopping wood, pouring tea, tying bundles of herbs, and turned their ears slightly, not quite knowing why. Tenzin too would listen. He would lower the wooden striker with reverence, return it to its resting place beside the bell, and remain there, motionless. His eyes would close, his chest would soften, and he would wait, not for the sound, but for what came after it. You see, many months ago, on his first winter in the temple, Master Gendo had told him, "The bell's sound is not what you hear, Tenzin. It is what remains after the hearing ends." At the time, the young monk had bowed deeply and whispered, "Yes, Master," as all students do when the lesson is too large to carry all at once. But he did not yet understand. And so each day he struck the bell, and each day he listened, not just with his ears, but with his body, with his breath, with his wondering. And yet, understanding did not come. Weeks became months. The trees turned their colors and let them go. The temple fox disappeared for a while and returned with thinner fur. Rain soaked the stone paths into mirrors, and the scent of wood smoke filled the halls. Still, the bell rang. Still, Tenzin listened, and still the silence after felt just empty. Not full, as Master Gendo had hinted. Not wholly, until one morning. It was late spring. A fog lay heavy in the valley, so thick that the temple's outer garden vanished into pale nothingness. The stones beneath Tenzin's feet were slick with mist, and his breath left no trace in the chilled air. He bowed to the bell, raised the striker, and let it fall, gently, with the weight of surrender. But the sound did not rise as before. It seemed to vanish before it fully formed, swallowed by the fog, absorbed by the quiet. No echo, no lingering hum, just absence. Tenzin stood longer than usual, confusion softening into stillness. A different kind of listening began to grow in him, one that had nothing to do with ears. And then something in him moved, not a thought, not an idea, just a quiet tug behind the heart. He turned and walked, past the moss garden, past the stone lantern smudged with lichen, down a path he rarely took, the one that curved behind the temple into a part of the forest where the light changed direction and time seemed to thin. He walked without aim, no sandals, no staff, just silence at his back, and that same quiet question curled gently in his chest. Hours may have passed, or none at all. Eventually the path dissolved into a grove of slender birch trees, and there, half hidden among ferns and moss, was a pond, small, oval, still as breath held in wonder. No frogs, no wind, no falling leaves, just the water holding the sky like a memory. Tenzan sat on a smooth rock beside it, and for the first time in many moons he did not try to understand. He simply was. Birdsong returned in the far distance. A drop of water fell from a leaf overhead and disappeared into the pond without a sound. And in that moment, somewhere between presence and forgetting, he felt it, the bell, still ringing, not in the air, not in his ears, but in the spaciousness inside him. It had never stopped. It had only become quieter than sound, wide as sky, deep as sleep. The silence that remained was not empty. It was listening, and Tenzin, he was not listening to it. He was part of it. He breathed out slowly, the exhale longer than the inhale, and felt something loosen inside. Some old knot of striving or searching, untied by stillness itself. When he returned to the temple, Master Gendo was sweeping the courtyard with a straw broom, his movements slow and even. He did not look up, but after a moment he spoke. "You heard it?" And Tenzan nodded, though no words rose. From that day on, he struck the bell the same way. Once, gently, but his listening had changed. He no longer waited for the sound to end. He waited for the silence to arrive, and within it he found not answers but presence, not knowledge but knowing. And so, if ever you find yourself in a quiet valley on a mist-wrapped morning, and you hear a bell that seems not to ring but to ripple through your bones, pause and listen, not just with your ears, but with the space between your thoughts. You may find yourself not hearing, but being heard. And you may wonder, gently, what have I been missing beneath all the noise?
And now, for the next story.
In a quiet dojo nestled among whispering bamboo, there was a moment held sacred, the silence after the bow. It was not the bow itself, not the graceful bending of bodies, nor the soft sound of feet touching polished wood. It was the stillness that followed, a breath suspended, a space where time seemed to pause and the world became utterly present. The masters called it the meeting of hearts, the place where respect transcends form and becomes presence. Each day, students would enter the dojo, their minds busy with worry, their bodies ready for movement. But before the first step, they would bow, and then they would listen to the silence, to the space that holds both student and teacher. This silence was like a river, calm on the surface, but deep and flowing underneath. It carried the weight of centuries of practice, the breath of countless souls who had stood in the same spot, bowed in the same way, and let the silence teach them. One morning, a young student named Hana noticed the silence more than the bow. She felt it linger, a delicate thread connecting her to the master, to the room, and most of all, to herself. It was in this silence that she began to understand what the practice truly meant. She realized that the bow was not just a gesture, but a gateway, a moment to set aside distraction, to meet the present without judgment, a moment to open and receive. As Hana stood in that silence, she felt the tension in her shoulders soften like a leaf falling to earth. The noise in her mind began to fade, not all at once, but like waves gently retreating from a quiet shore. She could hear her own breath, slow and steady, the gentle beat of her heart, and the soft rustle of bamboo leaves outside the open window. The room was filled with light, golden and warm, casting soft shadows that danced like whispers against the wooden floor. Hana's eyes closed, and she felt herself expand beyond the body, beyond the dojo, to something vast and unending. The silence was not empty, it was full of stories unspoken, lessons not taught with words, and wisdom carried in the spaces between sounds. She understood then that the silence after the bow was a teacher itself, a reminder that respect is not just shown, but felt, not just given, but received, and that in this quiet moment, connection blooms between bodies, between hearts, between all things. The next day, Hana arrived earlier than usual. The air was cool and crisp, tinged with the scent of rain-soaked earth and fresh bamboo shoots. She sat cross-legged in the corner, watching the room slowly fill. Other students arrived, some nervous, some confident, each carrying their own stories, their own busy thoughts. But when the master entered and the bow was made, the room fell into the same sacred silence. Hana noticed the faces change, muscles relaxing, eyes softening, breath deepening. The silence connected them all, like an invisible thread woven through the space. It was a moment without words, without instruction, a pause pregnant with possibility. And in that moment, she felt held. Days passed, and Hana found herself returning to the silence again and again. It was no longer just a pause, but a presence. A space where the noise of the world fell away like leaves in autumn. In the quiet, she could hear the soft rhythm of her own breath, the gentle beat of her heart, and the steady footsteps of those around her. She began to notice the small things, the way sunlight filtered through bamboo leaves, creating patterns on the floor that shifted with each passing cloud. The soft whisper of wind moving through the grove outside the dojo, the distant call of a bird, and the gentle rustle of fabric as students shifted in meditation. One afternoon, after a long practice, she sat beneath the bamboo grove near the dojo. The earth was cool beneath her hands, the scent of moss and fresh grass filled the air, the light was dappled and soft, and the world felt like a quiet breath held between heartbeats. Hana closed her eyes and listened. The silence was not empty. It was full of stories unspoken, lessons not taught with words, and wisdom carried in the spaces between sounds. She understood then that the silence after the bow was a teacher itself, a reminder that respect is not just shown, but felt, not just given, but received, and that in this quiet moment, connection blooms between bodies, between hearts, between all things. Hana felt a gentle warmth spread through her chest, a kindness flowing outward, connecting her to the trees, the earth, and the soft sky above. It was as if the silence held a sacred space where all things could simply be. In the days that followed, Hana began to carry this silence with her outside the dojo, into the marketplace, into her home, into her conversations. She found that when she slowed, when she listened deeply, the world around her changed. People spoke more softly, smiled more often, and moments that once felt rushed became invitations to breathe. One morning, as she walked along a quiet path, she paused beneath a great cherry blossom tree. Petals drifted like pink snow around her, and she closed her eyes once more, feeling the quiet deepen. She realized that the silence after the bow was not only a practice, but a way of being, a way to carry peace within and share it without words. Hana returned to the dojo the next morning, her heart lighter, her mind quieter, she bowed deeply, more fully than before, and let the silence settle between her and the master. This time, the silence stretched gently, like a soft thread weaving them together. Her movements became slower, more deliberate, flowing with the rhythm of breath and presence. The lessons she had learned were no longer just about form, but about the spaces in between. She noticed how the pauses in movement held as much meaning as the actions themselves. After practice, she would sit beneath the bamboo again, feeling the whispers of leaves above her. She noticed how the wind moved not against the trees but through them, a dance of stillness and motion. She understood that true harmony comes not from forcing, but from yielding. Her days grew calmer, her steps lighter, her heart more open. Others began to notice the change in her, a quiet strength, a peace that spoke without words. Her teacher watched with gentle approval, knowing that Hana had begun to walk the path beyond technique. One evening, the master approached her and said softly, "The silence after the bow is not just a moment. It is a path. Walk it with care." Hana nodded, knowing this was only the beginning. She realized the silence was not empty, but full of life, full of connection, full of love. It was a seed planted deeply within her spirit, ready to grow and bloom in its own time. In the weeks that followed, Hana began to share this understanding quietly, gently. She taught younger students to bow and to sit with the silence after. She encouraged them to notice the space, the stillness that connects teacher and student, one soul to another. The dojo became softer, more alive. Laughter mingled with quiet breaths. The energy shifted from hurried practice to mindful presence. It was as if the very air had changed, and Hana, once a novice herself, now became a keeper of stillness, a guide to the path of quiet respect. In the weeks and months that followed, Hana carried the silence with her, into the streets, into her home, into every moment. She shared it quietly, without words or ceremony, but with a presence that touched those around her. Neighbors noticed the calm in her eyes. Friends felt the warmth of her listening. Even strangers paused when she walked by, as if the stillness she carried invited them to breathe deeper. At the dojo, she began teaching the younger students. Before each lesson, she guided them gently to bow, and then to rest in the silence after. She told them, "Respect lives here, not just in our actions, but in the quiet space between them." The dojo grew softer, more alive. The sound of laughter mingled with quiet breaths. The energy shifted from hurried practice to mindful presence. One evening, as the sun set behind the bamboo, Hana stood beside her master. Together they watched the light fade, and in that fading light, she understood. The silence after the bow was not just a practice, it was a way of being, a ripple spreading from one heart to another. A gentle wave that touched everyone it met. A reminder that in stillness we find connection. In quiet we find love. And in presence we find peace. Long after Hana's footsteps had softened on the path, her lesson remained. Students who followed felt the whisper of silence held carefully in their own bows. The dojo, once a place of movement alone, became a sanctuary of stillness, where silence was not absence, but a presence full of life. and in that sacred space, the hearts of many met, in respect, in kindness, and in the shared rhythm of the silence after the bow.
And now, for the next story.
At the edge of the village, past the last row of plum trees, there was a small clearing where nothing much ever happened. The grass grew in quiet waves. The earth held few stones. Even the birds seemed to pass it by without singing. And then one spring, a man arrived with wood. He brought no cart, no tools, only a bundle of planks strapped to his back, and a look in his eyes that spoke of something not yet seen. He did not ask permission. He did not announce his purpose. He simply began building a bridge. But here's the thing, there was no river, no stream, no cliff, no gap to cross, just grass. He laid the planks with great care, tapping them into place with a smooth stone. Each day the bridge grew longer. Each night he sat quietly beside it, watching the sky change colours without ever looking away. By the 7th day, a small group had gathered from the village. Some watched in silence. Some laughed. Others began to whisper. "He's gone mad," one said. "There's nothing to cross here." "Maybe he's waiting for a river to come," another joked. But the man kept building, plank after plank, with slow, steady hands, until finally the bridge stood complete, 12 paces long, raised slightly above the grass, leading nowhere. And then he stopped, for days. No one crossed the bridge. Why would they? It began in grass and ended in grass. No road, no destination, just a quiet arc of wood in a place that had never needed one. Children came to play near it, but were warned not to climb. Elders walked past it slowly, squinting as though a purpose might reveal itself if stared at long enough. One morning, a monk from the hill temple arrived. He stood at one end of the bridge, hands folded behind his back, and said, "You've built something quite unusual." The man nodded. "Do you plan to move it somewhere?" "No," the builder replied. "It belongs here." The monk smiled politely, waiting for more. When no explanation came, he asked again, "But what is it for?" The builder looked at the bridge, then at the grass, then at the monk. "To cross," he said. "But to cross to where?" The builder paused, then answered, "That depends on who you are when you step on, and who you are when you step off." The monk didn't reply. He stood still for a long while, then bowed and walked away without ever placing a foot on the wood. That night, the man lit a single lantern at the base of the bridge and sat beside it as he always did. He did not guard it, he did not wait. He simply sat. As the wind moved gently through the tall grass and the moon rose like a question, no longer needing an answer. It happened quietly, as most true things do. An old woman came just after sunrise, carrying a small bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth. She did not speak. She did not hesitate. She stepped onto the bridge as though she'd always known it was there. The wood creaked gently under her feet. The breeze moved with her. And though she crossed in no more than 12 paces, something shifted. She stood at the other end for a long time, then sat down in the grass, facing back toward the bridge, as though looking at something she'd just left behind. That afternoon, a boy came running, barefoot, breathless. He stopped at the foot of the bridge, looked around, and crossed with a single joyful leap. When he reached the far side, he didn't run again. He walked, slower, lighter, as though something had been left behind that didn't need to be carried anymore. And so it began, one by one, a traveller, a widow, a farmer with his hat in his hands. They crossed the bridge not to go somewhere new, but to meet something already waiting. No toll, no signs, no words, just the sound of footsteps on warm wood and the silence that followed each one. And the builder, he remained where he always was, at the edge, beside the lantern, watching without asking, listening without speaking, smiling sometimes, but only when the wind moved just right through the grain of the wood. Seasons passed, the grass grew tall, then yellowed, then bowed beneath the snow, and still the bridge remained. It aged without aging. It creaked but did not crack. It stood but did not shift. People still came, not every day, but often enough that the wood grew smooth under the quiet rhythm of footsteps. Sometimes they crossed alone, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in silence. They met eyes with others midway across and nodded as if passing through a shared dream. The villagers no longer questioned its purpose. Children no longer laughed. Even the birds began to pause on its railings, resting their wings before continuing their invisible paths. And the builder, one day, he was simply gone. No goodbye, no note, just the empty lantern at the bridge's foot and the faint scent of pine smoke in the air. Some said he had gone to find a river worthy of his next bridge. Others believed he had walked across his own creation and never returned. But the bridge, it stayed. Through wind, through frost, through everything. And those who crossed it never forgot the feeling, though few could name it. Not peace, not healing, not understanding. Something quieter than all of that, like the weight of a question that no longer needs answering. And so it was, that a bridge which led nowhere began to take the people exactly where they needed to go.
And now, for the next story.
Long ago, in a valley tucked between misted hills, there was a village that never knew darkness. At night, when other places fell into shadow, this village shimmered, not from torches or oil lamps or even the moon, but from a single lantern, placed high in the temple tower. It did not flicker, it did not smoke, and it gave off no heat. There was no fire inside it, only light. Software warm, unmoving. The villagers called it the flame that needs nothing. No one knew who had made it. It had been there long before anyone living could remember. It was said that as long as the lantern glowed, the village would be safe. From storm, from sickness, from sorrow. And so each evening as the sky turned indigo, villagers would pause for just a moment and look toward the tower. No words, no ritual, just a quiet glance and a breath that deepened. But there was one person who had never looked up. A boy, no more than 10, who lived on the edge of the village with his grandfather. His name was Ko, and to him the lantern was not a mystery, but a question. How could it burn without flame? Without oil? Without even a wick? His grandfather would only smile. Some lights, he'd say, come from things you can't hold. But Ko wasn't satisfied. He needed to understand. And so one night, while the village slept beneath its familiar glow, Ko made a quiet decision. He would climb the tower and see the lantern for himself. Ko waited until even the insects had grown still. The village slept beneath its glow, peaceful as a pond, untouched by wind. He crept from his home, feet bare against the earth, and made his way toward the temple. The tower loomed above the trees, tall, wooden, and silent. No one had climbed it in years. The first step groaned beneath his foot, but nothing stirred. No monks, no bells, not even the birds in the eaves. Ko placed his hand on the rail and began to ascend. But something felt strange. The stairs weren't straight, they turned, shifted, and with each step the wood beneath him felt older, softer, as if time moved differently in the tower. Halfway up he paused. A window opened beside him, one he hadn't noticed before. It looked out onto the village. Only the village was not as it should be. The lantern's glow was gone, and yet everything shimmered, as if the houses themselves had begun to glow from within. Ko blinked, looked again. The vision vanished. Just rooftops, bathed in moonlight. He continued upward. Now each step felt heavier, not from fear, but from a weight he could not name. Near the top, the air grew warmer, not hot, but filled with something like breath. And then he reached the door, a simple panel of worn wood, unlatched, waiting. He pushed it open and saw the lantern. It was smaller than he'd imagined, made of paper and wood frayed at the corners, but inside, no candle, no fuel, only a soft orb of light, floating, still, silent, alive. It pulsed once, barely, and Ko felt it. Not in his eyes, but in his chest. As if the light had reached out and touched something he didn't know was waiting. Ko stood in the lantern chamber, bathed in soft, golden glow. It wasn't bright. It didn't shine. It simply existed, calm, constant, alive. He stepped closer. No warmth, no sound. And yet, something in him began to quiet. His thoughts, which had raced like sparrows just moments before, now settled, as if the light itself was listening. He reached out. His fingers hovered a breath away from the orb, but something held him still. Not fear, not warning, just the sense that this light was not meant to be touched, only witnessed. He sat down cross-legged on the old wooden floor, just as monks had once done, long ago. And he waited. No questions, no words, only breath, slow, even. The lantern pulsed again, faint, like the tide turning in the distance, and with it came something else. A memory. Ko saw his grandfather, years younger, kneeling beside the same lantern. Eyes closed, hands open. No one else in the tower. only the quiet of one person sharing space with something sacred. Then the memory faded, as gently as it had come. Ko opened his eyes. The lantern sat exactly as before, still, content. It needed nothing, yet gave everything. Not heat, not brightness, but space. A space for stillness, for breath, for truth to rise like steam from tea. And Ko, who had come seeking answers, now found himself with none. Only a question he didn't need to ask, and peace in not asking it. Ko stood slowly, his legs stiff from stillness. The lantern remained unchanged, but something inside him had turned. He bowed to it, not out of ritual, but gratitude. Then he made his way back down the tower. The steps no longer shifted, the air no longer pressed. And by the time he reached the earth, dawn had begun to bloom along the hills. The village was quiet, windows still closed, smoke just beginning to rise from morning fires. Ko walked home, barefoot still, and when he reached the threshold, his grandfather was waiting. Not angry, not surprised, just holding a cup of tea for each of them. Ko sat beside him. Neither spoke until his grandfather said, "You saw it." Ko nodded. And Ko thought for a long moment, then answered, "It doesn't burn." A pause, it listens. His grandfather smiled, a deep, knowing smile. "Yes, and now you do too." From that day forward, Ko changed. He spoke less, listened more. Sometimes he would stop mid-task just to notice the sound of wind through rice stalks, or the hush of snow falling on pine. The villagers began to feel it. Not all at once, not in words, but in small things. Quieter greetings, longer silences at the tea house. Children who paused before running through the temple gates. And each night, as always, they looked up towards the temple tower. The lantern still glowed, software still, unwavering, but no one asked anymore how it worked. Because now they understood. Some lights do not burn to be seen, they glow to remind us what's already within.
Now our story comes to rest. The path has been walked, the gentle light begins to fade, and stillness settles softly within you. Whether you followed the story closely or drifted gently along its quiet flow, you are exactly where you need to be. There's no need to hold on to the story or remember every detail. These tales are not meant to be captured, but to be felt deeply, like a whisper carried on the breeze, or the fading warmth of sunlight at dusk. They leave behind a subtle calm, a breath a little softer, a heart a little lighter. This is the gift of quiet moments, where nothing is demanded and everything is given. If this story brought you peace, please consider liking this video, sharing your thoughts below, and subscribing to Zen Mind Journey to join our community of gentle hearts. And now, simply rest in the stillness you carry within, letting your thoughts settle like leaves on a quiet pond. Until next time, breathe deeply and carry this calm with you.